Welcome to the Living Well podcast presented by Elim Christian Centre. My name's Liz Griffiths. I oversee the counselling hub here with Elim. I'm also a pastor and mother of four. And today I'm joined with Mike Griffiths, exec pastor. He's also a counsellor and lucky man that he is, my husband. I know.
Fine looking, good loving husband.
That's you. That's right.
That's me, baby.
30 years married this month. Pretty exciting.
Thank you,
yes,
Jesus.
That's good.
Keep it coming.
It's good. We're coming up to Valentine's Day. Note to all the husbands.
Yeah.
We're also coming up to World Marriage Day, so you have two opportunities.
Jeepers.
Very exciting.
Don't forget, boys.
And so this podcast, we're talking about all things marriage and, some things marriage. We're talking a little bit about our marriage.
Yeah, come on.
Yeah.
It's good. All things.
And today we're going to talk about another tough season in our marriage and what that was like for us, the mistakes that we made, how we got through, the key learnings along the way. And
Brilliant.
Yeah, so that's what we're going to talk about today.
Good. And we want to say marriage is absolutely flipping awesome. Like, the Bible talks about how he who finds a wife or a partner finds a good thing, right? And that whole theology around the goodness of God, that God is good and that marriage is part of that goodness. And it's like, so often we see so many marriages where there's just so much pain. And I think it's good for us to come back to the point that God actually intends our marriages to be good. Now, that doesn't mean there's not going to be challenges, difficulties, and pain.
Yeah.
But God intends it to be good. We believe it's good. After 30 years, I think we're enjoying this more than we ever have, and that's fantastic.
Yes, it's good.
Brilliant.
It's good.
Okay. So today we're going to talk about another season in our marriage. Liz and I got married. We had 4 years before we had kids. We had great pre-marriage counselling. So our first year or two was really a bit of a dream, lots of fun. Sex was fun, being together was fun, doing stuff was fun, career was fun. It was just awesome. And then, of course, we come into what ended up being one of our first challenging seasons, young kids, work pressure, lots of misunderstandings, accumulated hurts that we just were too exhausted to sort through. And so last time we talked a bit about that season and how we got through that and the lessons we learned and all that kind of thing. I think what happened after, we came out of that season and things were pretty good for a while, right? Like kids were fairly settled in school, and obviously there were always challenges. I think this is important, right? Would you agree that in every part of your life, there's always like a handful of blessing you can always be grateful for?
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's never not also a handful of frustration, challenge, difficulty.
Yeah.
As long as your hand of blessings fuller than your hand of frustration, you're going to be fine, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it can be a bit of a tension, eh? Like
Totally.
It's like if you're focusing all the time on all the stuff that's not good, then that can just be hard for you to see some of the blessings that are there.
And totally in marriage, because I don't know about you, but I know for me, I think back a huge chunk of my life just waiting for that time when there was nothing but blessing. When actually, the Bible, there's a theology of pain, there's a theology of trouble, and that Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble, it's there. And I think you've got to develop a theology and a worldview that says, yeah, man, there's so much good, and there's always going to be some stuff that's challenging, difficult, painful. That's okay. We've got to keep focused on the good. We've got to work out ways to deal with and manage the difficult stuff, but we're never going to be difficulty-free.
Yeah,
I think that after, we did go through a season when life, we had the balance pretty good. And I remember sitting with you and me on our Friday morning. Yeah. We're having a curry or something down the bottom of the Meridian in Dunedin, and we were both sitting there going, man, life is pretty good at the moment. We've got a good rhythm.
Yeah.
Work's going great. Church is growing. Kids were doing fantastic. You were working part-time in church now and had a real sense of meaning, and it was good. And then, of course, shortly after that,
it was like 1 week later.
Something crazy, right?
Yeah.
God intervened and kickstarted a process by which we handed over the church. We moved up to Auckland, and everything got turned upside down.
Yeah.
So this was a really interesting season, right? So for me, things were going well. I'd been on the national leadership team for about 3 years by this stage. We moved up to Auckland, kind of came in as the number 2 up here. Went from a largest church to essentially a mega church, one of the biggest churches.
Yeah.
Same stuff, but just much higher level of complexity. In that first year, I also stepped into the senior role for the movement, which of course is voluntary. And then, man, it's just like work just went completely nuts. So I was thinking back in preparation for this, realizing that I think it was in that first year, as well as stepping into a much more complex church environment, and then also taking on the leadership in the wider national sense. I had to lead 3 congregations through staff restructures, which are always difficult. Taking on these additional roles, we had the moral failure of one of our senior leaders around the country. Meanwhile, we're trying to start the process of resetting vision for the movement, implementing values, writing a book to assist with, a document to assist with governance practices. There was just so much going on. Meanwhile, we had a gigantic mortgage. We were trying to manage, obviously, our marriage. We're trying to work, keep going healthy. We had teenagers now with all sorts of complexities in that situation. And somewhere in this journey, I just started to run out.
Yeah.
There were times when I was flying. I was out of the church every week for periods of time, trying to put out fires and resolve issues. And I just started to get exhausted, like really exhausted. And as that went on, like as you go into burnout, your effectiveness starts to decrease. So I was frustrated with myself, right? And so now what I'm doing is I'm going, what's wrong with me? I've got to work harder. I've got to work my way through this. And so I'm just working longer hours. I'm pushing myself to stay engaged and get stuff done. And of course, the more I work, the faster I go through my available internal resources, the quicker and deeper I go into burnout. And I couldn't work out what was going wrong. I couldn't logic my way through it. And so I just began to run out of everything. And I mean, I remember one time in a national leadership team meeting, and we just started, and we always started with prayer. But I said, hey, look, guys, let's just get on our faces before the Lord. And, I have to say, I wasn't suggesting we get on our faces because I felt that was prophetically the right thing to do. It was because I was so close to tears that I had to hide myself somewhere. And so I hid myself by lying on the floor until I could get back on top of back in control of my emotions. I was so stressed and angry and frustrated and lost and this whole thing. I mean, it was... and I'm trying to hide this, right? Like I'm a senior leader, I'm trying to hide this. I can't let anyone find out that I'm struggling. And so to do that, I had to isolate, right? I would have meetings, so I'd cut them short. All right, that's it. I'm out of here. I walk out of the room and people are like, what's up with, I found out later, what's up with Mike? But I was just trying to manage it because I've got a short fuse. I'm so close to overwhelm all the time. And this kind of unfolded over about probably a year and a half to 2 years when I am just in a mess. Like, it was so difficult.
It was a really difficult season.
And so, of course, us, right?
Yeah. So yeah.
Which is what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about
right.
us, the impact of this stuff on marriage.
So I want to know what was the hardest. What was the hardest about that when you kind of think in the context of our relationship?
Yeah, great. So there were 2 or 3 moments that I think I found so distressing, which were also super helpful because they were the moments that pushed me towards having to find resolution.
Yeah.
So the first one that was profoundly difficult, I think, was when I realized how it was impacting our kids.
Right.
End of the year, end of the year, kids have got all their books from the year, right? And you being our minimalist, let's tidy stuff up, let's not carry lots of junk. You were trying to get the kids to go through all their books from the last year or two and throw them out. And one of our kids was really struggling, and you said, Mike, can you please just help whichever kid it was? Oh, yeah, sure. So there's a pile of books and I'm going through them. And so I happened to be flicking through this child's English book because I'm like, oh, maybe there's some stories in here that they might want to reflect on when they're 21 or whatever. And I happened to flick the book open, and it was an exercise they had to do in class. And the exercise was they had to draw themselves, and then they had to draw pictures of all their family members, and then they had to use 3 words to describe each family member. And, it was mum, and they'd written, she's pretty, she's fun, she loves me. So 3 little things about each person, and they had this for, including the dog, and it got round, and it got round to me, and the 3 words this child used to describe their father was, he's always working.
Yeah.
And, that just it just wrecked something in me, because I'm trying so hard to be a good dad, right? And then
trying to solve it,
and what are the 3 words you might use to describe your dad? He's always working. That was deeply devastating for me, but the problem is, right, I'm in burnout, I'm exhausted, I'm desperately trying to hold on. So
it was a catalyst for change, though, right?
Well, it ended up being that way, but before that, the problem is, I got nowhere to go with this. I'm not even sure if I mentioned it to you. I can't remember, because I think one of the big impacts on our marriage was that not only was I isolating myself from colleagues, but I didn't want you. I didn't want to frighten you. I didn't want you to feel like I'm the guy. I'm the guy who's got to make this work. I'm the guy who finds the answers. I'm the guy who fixes stuff. And so that led on to the second, that was a profound moment for me where I'm going, oh my gosh, this is not the family. This is what we want. This is what I'm doing something profoundly wrong here. That was a monstrous moment in my life. The second moment was,
and a lot of this was an internal thing that you were wrestling with. Totally. And so what I was sort of seeing was part of that, but what was going on inside your head and heart, which you were able to reflect on later.
Yeah, because I'm assuming what you experienced was, I'm just working all the time. I'm out the door, I'm focused, I'm not talking to you.
And more tired and more exhausted.
And therefore more irritable and more short
distant.
And more distant. All that stuff, right? And so this led to, I remember
the mission bay thing, hey?
Yeah. I remember when I realized that I couldn't logic my way through this. I couldn't work out what was wrong. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have any answers. I was deeply fearful of where it was going, and I realized I had to tell you.
Yeah.
And so we went out to that cafe in Mission Bay. And, I was profound. I was really afraid. I was really fearful. And I'm not sure what I was fearful was. I think there was somewhere I thought that you were going to go, oh my gosh, you're not the man I married. You're not this capable, strong, I don't know who you are. You're weak. Because the problem, right, with this stuff is that it feels like failure.
Yeah.
Even if no one even really sees it, you are confronted with it, right? And I remember, this is really powerful for me, Lizzie. We went to this cafe, as you remember, and I just said, babe, I just need you to know I can't do this anymore. I'm dying. I don't know what to do. I can't find a way to go forward. And, I did this big vomit, and to my real shock, you were just like, well, it's going to be fine. I love you. I'm not going anywhere. We're gonna find our way through this. It was, I don't know what I expected. But you were just an absolute rock, 100%, right there. Yeah, it was, I remember walking away, and it was just like the sun was shining for the first time, and we hadn't solved anything but having an ally, because I think in our marriage what it meant was—
You realised I was an ally.
I did then. But prior to that, right, because I wasn't sharing any of this with you.
No.
So all you're seeing is Mike's doing the stuff, he's away a couple of nights every week.
A little bit grumpy.
Super grumpy, right? Really problematic. And
okay, so there was something that happened in there where you went, oh, okay, she's actually on my team. She's actually on my team. Actually, when I do feel like I'm failing and not strong.
I think for the first time it somehow said to me that it's okay. It's okay to not be able to fix this, to not have all the answers. I was falling apart, man, and working so hard to make sure when I turned up at work, I'm good, and yet increasingly I wasn't. And then the third worst moment, the final one for me, was really shortly before we started making some change. And I remember driving to work this one day, and I got to turn into the car park of work.
Yeah.
And just something in me went, I can't do this.
Yeah.
And so I kept driving.
Yeah.
And a quarter of an hour later, found myself on the motorway driving out of the city.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't go to work, and I couldn't tell you. I didn't know didn't know who to turn to. And I think the weirdest thing, Lizzie, about that one was I can tell you exactly. I was driving down the motorway out of Auckland, and it felt like that there was this tissue-like veil between sanity and insanity. And I felt that I was losing my mind. Like I felt like I was losing a grip on what was real, and I became really frightened that I was going nuts, that I was losing my mind, that I was losing sanity. And that was a very frightening moment for me. Oh, and there was one other one I have to talk about, which was in the midst of all this, because of course I'm not sleeping now. I hadn't slept for months and months and months, maybe 2-3 hours a night. I'd just lie in bed ruminating, going over stuff, leadership decisions I had to make, difficult problems so I had to find a way through, difficult conversations I had to have with people. I just hour after hour in bed going through and going over and over and over it. And I remember, and so of course a part of this, it's not just all work, right? I'm looking at the size of our mortgage, and I remember getting to the place of going, I cannot see any way forward for us financially other than me taking my own life and you getting life insurance. And therefore I need to find out, how can I do this in a way that will not nullify our life insurance policy? And it was very clear, very rational. It wasn't even overly emotional. It was just like, there's no other way. There's literally no other way forward for you and for our family financially than for me to take myself out of the equation at some point. And it didn't even overly frighten me.
And so you're driving to Hamilton?
No. So what happened was, the next couple of days, I remember I went for a big walk with the Lord, as I tend to do when I get a bit stuck on things, and I was walking with the Lord, and having obviously been in pastoral ministry for 15 years by this stage, I dealt with lots of suicidal people, and I for the first time became aware of how blinkering suicidality and depression is. And I realized that if I was talking to myself, if this was someone else, that there were so many options in front of me, but I was so aware that I could only see this one. And so I realized at that point that the advice I would always give to others, which is, when you are depressed, you cannot make any major decisions because you can't see the options.
That's really good.
I remember going, okay, at the very least, you have to apply this to yourself. So I made the decision on this walk that I would make no major decisions, whether that be taking my life or anything else, for at least the next 2 months, and give myself time to try and sort this through more. So I put the suicidality thing to bed, but I was aware that it was like, this is a big deal.
But you also acknowledged that you weren't seeing things clearly because things were being veiled, or the lens through which you were seeing life was a sort of a depressed place.
It's like having blinkers on.
Like you're not seeing the world clearly. It's not a real picture.
Yeah.
It's
a very narrow picture. You think these
so
are all my options.
Yeah.
But I realized that with depression, you get blinkered, and there are actually hundreds of options. You just can't see them.
Yeah.
And so you can't make decisions when you're in that place because you're not seeing the world correctly. So anyway, fast forward, I'm driving out of the city. I'm a complete wreck. And in the end, I ended up going, who can I talk to? And wonderful mate of mine, Andrew Smith, who at the time was a senior pastor. He's now a life coach and a supervisor. And I just thought, I need to talk to him. And so I rang him, and he cleared his calendar for me, and I kept driving and ended up in Hamilton, and we ended up in a cafe. And he listened to me for an hour and then just helped frame some of my thinking and challenged me. And that was when I needed to make radical change. That was the first time. So, and again,
And there was
Let's pull this
something
back
in
to
there.
marriage.
Sorry, and there was something in there. Yeah, just bringing this back to you and me. There was something in there where you were able to articulate that feeling of like, oh my goodness, it'd be better if I wasn't here. You were able to articulate that to me, and we were able to discuss that thing of that kind of that lens through which you were seeing the world, and for us to go, you're sort of seeing it in that way, and so.
What was that like for you? Do you remember that?
I can remember. That was just incredibly surprising to me because, again, I'm not inside your head, and so I didn't see the depth to which you were struggling. And so that was a surprise, and obviously, it's very frightening, and, what the heck do you do with that, and how serious is this, and all that sort of stuff. Obviously, you went and sat with someone, you went and sat with Andrew, and you got, because I think that when you are feeling at the end of yourself, you just can't hold that within yourself. You've got to talk to somebody about it. So I was grateful that you had done that, and then I was grateful that you talked to me. So we were able to go, okay, we're in this together, and then sort of figure a way through, which was a bit of a muddle through, wasn't it? Getting through that time.
I think one of the great, like if we pull this back to us, our marriage, right? The biggest problem was that I just wasn't sharing this with you.
Yeah.
Because I felt I couldn't for whatever reason, because I guess it's the sense of pride or whatever it is that I have to. I'm the guy. I'm the leader. I've got to fix stuff. I've got to do stuff. And the more I struggled, the more it felt like failure, and therefore the more I isolated myself.
And all I wanted to do was be a part and be connected and us do it together, right?
And so here's the problem, right, is that you're pushing me all the time to talk to me. And then on the very odd occasion that I would talk, I had no appreciation that you had no idea about the journey. And so then, do you remember that? We ended up calling it my Gollum moment. Remember that?
Yes, there was a Gollum moment. I remember it well.
Was it
Christmas Day.
It's a Christmas Day.
Yes, and we had all the kids there, and I think we might have even had other families staying, and then we had your parents there as well. So there was quite lots of extended family there, and our kids, there was a lot to do. There was a church service to do, and there was family stuff, and there was a lunch to do, and I was incredibly stressed. And so
because you're having to carry the family stuff by yourself.
Yeah, but even still, it was like trying to figure out the lunch thing, and when are the presents, and we've got these people we've got to kind of look after that are staying, and you were in a really tough place. And I think I was pushing you to, I need you to do this, and I need you to do this, and that was just piling pressure on you, and that was sort of without probably an awareness of the depth of your just feeling distressed. And so all I was doing was just lumping kind of rocks on you.
Well, I don't think you were. I think what you were doing was reasonable. The difficulty is that I hadn't communicated anything, and so then we ended up in one of the kids' bedrooms, door closed, and I'm just, I don't know what I was doing. I was like a Gollum voice just going, you don't understand.
Yeah.
What's going, how desperate I am, close to the edge. I was just totally a flipping mess, and you were crying, and it was all
it's all a little bit messy, wasn't it? We had everyone downstairs.
Yeah. But through the conversation at Mission Bay, which opened the door for me to realise actually I can be failing, and you are still 100% there for me. And then through us having these confrontational conversations,
and you getting support outside of the marriage, that was that conversation that you went and had
with Andrew,
with Smith, and like that was you getting support outside, because that also, when you've got a spouse, it's a lot for them to carry. And I do think it's both, and I do think that you need to be on the journey with the spouse, but I think that you also need to be getting that outside help, which you at that point did, which was, I think, really helpful.
Yeah, it was.
Did you say?
Yeah. And so, and it was interesting, right, because Smith's advice that basically he was saying was, he said, I've heard you say this before. He said, and if you don't change anything, nothing will change.
Yeah.
And I realised in that moment how much I had been resisting change. And it's interesting, I was just reading just in my quiet time this week in 1 Samuel, it's when God's rejected Saul as king, but Samuel is hesitating going and anointing David as king. And God says to Samuel, are you still mourning Saul? I've rejected him. You need to get cracking and go and do this. And it was like, oh, that's exactly what it is. I didn't want to let go of these things that I've been mandated through a commission to. I was struggling to let go of them. I was mourning the loss of those things and what it would mean for me and what all the things I felt I still had to do and all this kind of things. But at some point, I had to face my mourning and face my grieving and make the change.
Yeah.
And then that was the decision point that turned things around. And so then I came home and said to you, I'm going to do this. I'm going to step off national leader role. I'm going to do that. And then it was around that time too that we were given the opportunity to move out of Botany and go and take over City. And it just felt like it was absolute God thing.
Yeah.
And so God kind of worked with us in that thing. But I think it was a really profound time for our marriage, because I think we, in that season, learned to be vulnerable with each other more than we ever had before. Certainly I did with you.
Yeah.
It's funny, young couple charging on, man, we got this, we're doing great in our careers. It's not until you're really confronted with the possibility of personal failure and you have to front up to sharing that with the other person, that's when you really get to know each other, right? And that's when you're really known by someone else. Because I think this was the thing. I think that you saw me in my failure, but you still believed in me. And I think, would you say that's been one of the most interesting parts of the journey, probably in the last 10 years? 10? Yeah, maybe 5 to 10 years. And that's the whole ally enemy thing, learning that we can trust. Well, for me, learning I can trust you. And then, boy, that whole journey, right, with the whole family of origin thing. And there's a lot to this, right?
Yeah. Okay, so key lessons along that time?
Well, as it pertains to marriage, right?
Yeah.
Like our marriage that was one of the toughest times in our marriage, because I was just gone. I was offline. I was just a mess. I was a wreck. I was totally consumed by work because work was so difficult.
And actually you were still working and you were still fronting up and you were still doing that. So a lot of this was an internal thing that was going on, right? And you might say that your productivity wasn't,
terrible.
But you on the face of it, things were still going along. So
key learnings.
Yeah, key learnings.
So one of them was about, actually, when stuff isn't working, you have to make a change. No one's going to do it for you. The cavalry isn't coming. God has given you responsibility for your own life and decisions, right? I had to make the change. I had to make it for you. I had to make it for our kids. I could not keep going knowing that what I was doing to my kids. And for my own health. I mean, I remember that was when I started having chronic back issues. It would take me 15 minutes to get out of bed in the morning. My back was so problematic. And that's when I, got to the place of realizing I have to run. I have to run regularly. It's the only thing that helps my back. But man, I was
so taking responsibility, key lessons, taking responsibility, this is about me, but this is about my wife and my kids as well. It's like this is us it's that team thing again, eh?
Yeah. So embracing change. Sometimes you have to let stuff go. You have to be willing to make change. I think too, another key lesson in that was to stop caring about what you can't control. Remember that we had a season in there where I went through this time and my everyday mantra was I don't care. And you would come to me and go, oh, there's this thing happening, like you need to do something with this. And I just go, I just don't care. And
initially I was appalled because I was like, no, but you do care because you've always cared and you've actually always cared too much. And now you don't care but you do care. But actually what I learned in that was you trying to
well, I think I explained it to you right. It wasn't that I don't care, it's that I can't care.
Yeah.
I have to just get me right at the moment.
Yeah.
Like I've never done this before. I've really got to get me right.
Yeah.
So it's not that I don't care, so I choose not to care about that.
Yeah. Because you had to prioritise getting yourself back.
Yeah. And none of those things fell apart or fell over.
No.
But learning to stop caring about the things you can't control. I had to get brutally committed to Sabbath.
Okay, so define Sabbath just quickly.
A day a week where I do no work, and no home work. A day of rest, a day of whatever it is that rests. And, it's been interesting over the years chatting with a good friend of mine, Adam Dodds, who's, of course, a theologian, and learning about Sabbath more. And sometimes I think we make the mistake always say we as human beings, we lean towards legalism because it's measurable. But the idea that Sabbath is about whatever you do, that's a stop. That's a pause. That's a not work. That's okay. It's intriguing looking through the Gospels, the amount of stuff that the Pharisees were real hardcore about the Sabbath on, and Jesus was like, nah, you can't eat grain walking through the grain field on a Sabbath. She's like, think you can. Like, it's intriguing when you look at it, the number of things about Sabbath that Jesus is like super relaxed on, like, yeah, this is fine, this is good. So I had to learn how to Sabbath. I had to.
And actually that whole idea of Sabbath is probably something too that's become a bit of a value for us, or a bit of a, and I think we see that reflected now with some of our kids, just kind of going, that's really important to have that day of rest.
And I think learning to be vulnerable with you. It's been a huge part of the journey for me. Learning to be vulnerable with you and learning to, when there's distance, to breach that, to restore the breach. And sometimes it's as blunt tool as, lying in bed and just going, I just got to reach out. I've got to put my hand on her. I've just got to reach. I've got to roll over and put my arm over her. It's like there's a big concrete stone wall down the middle of the bed. There's distance between us. I'm in my own self, and I've got to reach out.
And you talk about times, when that just felt like that was restorative for you.
Well, I think one of the interesting things in our marriage, right, was as I isolated myself, as we became isolated, I became grumpy and irritable. I became non-communicative. I'm overworking. I'm not home. Of course, everything dries up, like our physical intimacy dries up, all that kind of stuff. Not that it never completely disappeared, but and what was intriguing was I didn't realize until much later how much I needed you, how much I needed to be touched, to be near, to have a place of comfort. And I remember I found out quite late in the piece. I remember lying in bed one night. I couldn't sleep again. I'm so stressed. We probably hadn't had physical intimacy in some time. And on this one particular night, I rolled over and I just slid my hand underneath your warm body. And something about your physical touch, I just went to sleep. It was the strangest thing. It was just like comforted my soul. And from that point on, very often, because I didn't have the emotional anything to reach over and go, babe, let's make love.
Yeah.
But just to have your touch. And so this became the only way I could sleep. I'd roll over and I'd slide my hand under your sleeping body, just feel your skin on my hand. And somehow that brought peace to and I would sleep. It was the weirdest, most wonderful thing. But I look back on that and realize how much I needed you physically as well as emotionally and spiritually and all those sorts of things.
Interesting that whole kind of physical touch thing. I have a friend and she talks about in her relationship that her hair is therapy to her husband. That
hair.
That he has some sort of anxiety and stress and stuff, and that he'll play with her hair, and it just brings him such a sense of peace and calm in the midst of how he's feeling. So it's interesting, isn't it? Just that power of physical intimacy that brings connection within the context of
So
relationship.
how was this for you? I'm not present. I'm offline.
Yeah, I guess I felt a bit powerless. I felt like I needed to be practically carry some of the home stuff.
Yeah.
I guess I saw that you cared so much about your work, you cared about us, and you were trying to kind of fix things by working harder and longer, but it was actually depleting you. So I was worried about that. I didn't quite know where the help needed to come from. Again, you're in the sort of work that we do, you're a little bit like you don't want to be seen not to be kind of managing. So that had some complexities to it that were challenging at times. You can't just talk to anybody about this stuff. It was hard. And I guess I just kind of just kept going with what I could do, and I wish I'd been able to be more intentionally helpful or proactive or seek out what need. But some of it I just needed to listen. I just needed to be supportive. I just needed to let you find your way out of it.
That was the great difficulty, right? They're just
and that was taking time.
What do you do in that when I inadvertently?
I guess go to God. I guess I go to God.
Yeah.
Maybe had a friend or maybe to be honest with you, I struggled to probably talk to friends about it. Which I think in hindsight, actually, if I had one person I could have talked to about it, that would have helped me. Because again, it's that thing, is like, yes, we need to talk, but actually both people need to have somebody, I think, that's a trusted ally outside of the marriage, that they can just kind of work through some stuff, because not all of my worry or stress was helpful to bring to you in that season. I had to be stronger. Not stronger than you, but I had to be stronger than
you kind of did.
I needed to be strong in that season to give you the opportunity to not have to be that. We take turns at these things, right, through some of these seasons of life. And so it wasn't my turn to, I needed to be strong. So I had to kind of choose that to be strong and not come apart myself.
And I think too, if I remember correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it seems to me, I remember in that season, there were a couple of things. At one point I said to you, in my efforts to be vulnerable, I think I said to you at some point amidst that, Lizzie, I do not have the emotional strength at the moment to initiate conflict resolution. So if stuff's gone down.
That's right.
I'm for the next few months, I'm really sorry, but I'm going to need you to initiate that. And I think I also said to you that I didn't have the emotional strength to initiate lovemaking.
That's right.
And if I'm going to need you to initiate that,
That's
which
right.
must have been unbelievably hard for you, because we were so distant emotionally, right?
Well, I think it provided something that I could do. It's a way that I could support. It's a way I could help. It was a way that I could be strong for the two of us in that particular season. And I know I found that helpful. I found that helpful because you gave me, you could do this, or these are some things that will, and it also helped me to make sense of, for you to say, like, just in this season I can't. So that was good as well.
We've all got our limits, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Every single one of us, and it is profoundly disturbing when you find them.
Totally. And I think that sorry, just coming back to that in that season, and then it's like you kind of come through that stuff, and then there's a recalibrating where the one's been a bit stronger and the one's felt a bit weaker, and then there's this recalibrating that happens where you find more of a shared place again, and you kind of things, and that happened for us as well, and we sort of readjusted. And I can remember that season, that readjust happening. I can't quite put my finger on.
Well, see, that was interesting because as we came out, I made the decision, I stepped down as national leader, we moved into the city congregation, and as all that came off and I kind of came right over a period of months, then, I learned so much through that process. I think I gained so much wisdom. I learned how to be a bit more vulnerable. I think we were better. And then you were going through a season challenge, because then you had to let go of, because you were running our Replenish conference nationally in multiple venues, and you were doing all that stuff, and you had to let that stuff go.
That's right, and that was my turn.
That was your turn. But I think a really cool thing in that, right, is that even when you're at your bottom, you will not stay at the bottom.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Man,
that's
I felt like
right.
I was at the bottom.
Yeah.
And it's great to look back and to realize carrying forward that, when you're in your bottom, you're not going to stay
No.
there. As long as you do the
Yeah.
work,
Yeah.
learn to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Because here's the interesting thing, right? I was getting life coaching through this. I was getting spiritual direction through this. I was trying to get help from everywhere I could. The one thing I didn't do was counseling.
Yeah.
Which I should have.
Yeah.
But nothing was helping. But when I reflect back, you know who was the help for me? It was you.
Mm. Mm.
And it was as I learned to share the journey with you, it was that really was somehow the thing that gave me the strength to make the right decisions.
Mm.
And then, we went into another season, and we're back.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great thing to realize in marriage. When you're in a tough place, you're not going to stay in a tough place.
Yeah.
Work through it. Things are going to be good again. They're going to be better than they've ever been, right?
Yeah. You're going to develop that resilience. You're going to have put some things in place, like for you, the Sabbath.
Yeah.
You're going to,
And learning to
But you do have to stop,
change.
right? You do have to go, hold on.
Yes.
This isn't okay.
Yes.
Actually, I need better. My family needs better.
Yeah.
Stop and figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, when I asked the question, where was God in all this for me? Because I guess we need to wrap this. I find Elijah's story very helpful to me. Sometimes you're so burned out that even God knows he can't talk to you until you've eaten and rested. God didn't talk to Elijah until he'd eaten and rested, eaten and slept again, and then gone for a bit of a walk in the desert for 30 days. Then God spoke to him. And yet God provided an angel for Elijah to sustain him. And I absolutely believe that God provided me an angel. And that was you, that somehow you were that strong presence that kept me going and helped us through that. And, I think that God is absolutely present in our difficulties. And that whole thing about he who finds a wife finds a good thing. I think this was a key part of our journey, right, about realizing that actually my greatest ally aside from God is you. And when I realize that and start to lean into that and be open to that and share that with you, and there's not too much we can't find our way through, right?
Yeah. And I think, to be able to have that season of such vulnerability and you feeling, and experiencing what you experienced, but actually that you don't stay there, like you come back to be that strong, incredibly, your work is amazing. You're an amazing dad. You're an amazing. It's good. What we have is really good.
Yeah.
And even in what we had is really good. That includes that we've journeyed through some of these really difficult seasons, come through them, and those things have actually added strength and decisions, and we've learned things along the way that make us that strong. And I think some of the strength that we are grateful for in our marriage today have come because we've had to walk through some of that difficult stuff. And so, yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think, the whole thing in James 1, right? Consider it pure joy when you face trials and temptations of many kinds. Because growth only happens in the tough stuff. It only happens in the tough stuff.
Yeah.
And doesn't make it pleasant, but it's just so important. So in terms of takeaways, man, the takeaways that I take away from that thing is, Mike, be vulnerable with your wife. Tell her what's really going on and be honest about it. Secondly, the importance of Sabbath. God says right from the day one, you got to take a day a week to decompress. You got to stop. You got to let go of that stuff. I think that's absolutely critical. I think another takeaway is to realize that you will trade any career success to have a great relationship with your wife and kids. And so realize that early.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful that I stepped out when I stepped out, because what I have with you and our amazing kids, I would trade for any career success. And you just don't realize that when you're in the midst of it sometimes.
And I would say, don't freak out when your spouse goes through a difficult time.
Brilliant.
They will come through, they will come out, and you can stand alongside them and you can be their strength for a season. And it's not forever, and they will come through with the right help, and working through that. And I would say that go to God, and sometimes when it is difficult and one spouse is really struggling, sometimes you do have to really lean into your relationship with God. I think that's really important.
Cool.
And then the other thing, as I would say, was just have a trusted friend that you can talk to, because
Right.
some of these
So
things,
good.
sometimes some of it, it's not helpful to talk with your spouse about some of your own struggle. Sometimes it's good to actually take that to a trusted friend or counsellor or mentor, or somebody that will listen and help you to make sense of your own thoughts so that you can bring some strength back into the relationship. So it's kind of vulnerability on one hand, but then it's strength in another, right? So those things are important as well. So in closing, we just want to say that, marriage is the most amazing thing.
Come on.
The good, the bad,
Yeah,
the ugly,
so good.
the hard seasons are as important as the amazing adventure seasons. And so this has been our second podcast. We will be doing one more coming up, so look out for that. Thanks for joining us today. And we also just want to say, if you're struggling in your marriage, with your partner, can we encourage you to have the honest conversation? Can we encourage you to get help, whether that's reading books or listening to podcasts, whether that's doing a marriage retreat or getting some marriage relationship counselling, talking to a mentor or a pastor, or just getting the help that you need. You don't have to suffer alone. There is incredible help out there, and it is worth stopping and having those difficult initial conversations to start getting your relationship in the direction that you think it should go. So great to have you with us today, and watch this space for episode 3 shortly. Thanks for listening today. If this has raised something for you, 1737 is the number of a counselling number that you can text, that you can call if you need immediate support. You can also contact your local pastor if you need support. And then if you need some counselling at elimchristiancentre.org.nz. Love to support you on your journey. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.